Mikhail Gorbachev impersonators showed off the game at trade shows. The Tetris hype grew as release day approached. But right before Tetris launched, in January of 1988, Robert Stein received a telex message from another organization in Russia. The group accused Stein of selling Tetris illegally and demanded that further negotiations go through them. They were known as ELORG. ELORG was short for Electronic Org Technica. The Soviet Ministry of Foreign Trade formed ELORG for the purpose of importing and exporting technology, specifically to other communist nations. But in the 1980s, under the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev, restrictions on foreign trade with the West loosened. ELORG was now free to seek licensing deals for technology internationally. This included computer software. ELORG learned that some of the researchers at the Russian Academy of Sciences were creating computer programs, including Pajitnov's artificial intelligence software. ELORG met with Pajitnov to see if the program could be sold internationally. During the meeting, Pajitnov casually mentioned Tetris and how he and AcademySoft had trouble getting a licensing deal with Robert Stein. Representatives Pajitnov and AcademySoft had no authority to negotiate international software licensing deals. They demanded all the paperwork be handed over immediately. What they learned was incredible. A researcher at the Russian Academy of Sciences was negotiating an international business deal for a video game. Not only that, but it was about to be sold in the West, and nothing had been signed. From that point on, ELORG was in charge of all negotiations for Tetris. They asked Robert Stein to come to Moscow to explain himself. When he arrived, Stein said it felt like an interrogation. Representatives from ELORG didn't trust him. "Why are you selling Tetris without our permission?" they asked. "I didn't even know your group existed," Stein replied. He held his ground, arguing that pulling the deal now could be an embarrassment to the USSR, as it would make them seem unreliable in the world economy. The two sides went back and forth in what seemed like a never-ending game of tennis. ELORG wanted final approval over any of the games. Stein wanted the rights to all home computer systems, not just the IBM PC. The two sides continued to negotiate. Nothing had been signed. But in the West, Tetris moved forward. On January 29, 1988, Spectrum Holobyte released Tetris for $34.95. It came in a red box with the word Tetris written in Russian in bold yellow characters. It stood out from the other games. The Russian marketing angle worked brilliantly. Spectrum Holobyte sold 100,000 copies in the first year. In the UK, Mirrorsoft sold fewer, but still a sizable amount. Then again, they also removed a lot of the Russian imagery from their version. The reviews were glowing.
Tetris is so simple to learn that you'll know all the rules 5 minutes after opening the box. But it's so intriguing to play that once you've started, you'll be spending many hours in front of the computer screen. So many that you'll begin to wonder if Tetris isn't really part of a diabolical plot, hatched in the evil empire to lower worker productivity in the United States. Dennis Lynch, Chicago Tribune.
As computer games go, it is simple and addictive. Critics say it lacks the guns and explosions and mayhem that appeal to young connoisseurs of American entertainment software. But then, Soviet software is apparently softline. Peter Lewis, The New York Times.
Tetris fever enveloped the West and was being played at home and at work. Spectrum Holobyte even added a boss key to the game. Pressing the escape button would quickly bring up a blank command prompt. To Spectrum Holobyte and Mirrorsoft, it was a resounding success. But Robert Stein was nervous. His deal with the Russians was still in limbo. Spectrum Holobyte and Mirrorsoft began porting the game to other computer platforms. But finally, in May of 1988, 4 months after Tetris hit the market, ELORG and Robert Stein made a deal. Andromeda Software got the rights to Tetris for home computer systems. They also got the rights to port Tetris to, quote, different types of computers. To Stein, this meant home consoles as well. ELORG received an undisclosed amount up front, as well as royalties on every game sold. Stein breathed a sigh of relief. He quickly phoned Jim McConnachie at Mirrorsoft, confirming the deal was officially done. When McConaughey asked about the arcade and handheld rights, Stein assured him that deal was imminent as well. From there, they wove a tangled web of sublicenses that would ultimately turn into a ferocious battle over who could do what with Tetris. In January of 1988, Spectrum Holobyte showed off their new product at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas. Spectrum Holobyte president Phil Adams stood proudly on the showroom floor, displaying Tetris to a long line of attendees. Standing in that line was Hank Rogers, owner of Japanese game publisher Bulletproof Software. Rogers was born in the Netherlands, but grew up in the United States. While in college at the University of Hawaii, he fell in love with a Japanese woman and moved back to Japan with her. From there, he got into game development and formed Bulletproof Software. Inspired by the game Dungeons & Dragons, Hank Rogers released The Black Onyx, an ambitious, turn-based RPG, the likes of which Japan had never seen before. By the end of 1984, it was the best-selling computer game in Japan. In 1985, he was enamored with the Nintendo Famicom and determined to make a game for the system. After reading in a magazine that Nintendo president Hiroshi Yamauchi was a fan of the board game Go, he set up a meeting. Rogers pitched that he could make Go for the Famicom. Yamauchi gave him an advance of 30 million yen, or approximately $300,000, to make the game. Within minutes, Rogers had a deal with Nintendo, cash, and became an official Nintendo licensee. By 1988, Rogers was getting more into publishing. He frequented trade shows, looking for the next big game to bring back to Japan. So there he stood, waiting in line to play an odd-looking new game from Russia, Tetris. He wasn't quite sure what to make of it. Tetris was probably the quietest game at the show. Even then, products were graphically exciting, but this game was a totally different thing. I wanted to play it because it struck some basic chord. I couldn't stop playing. After going through the line more than 5 times to play, Rogers was convinced. Tetris was the game he was looking for. It was simple, seemed easy to program, and would require little translation. Rogers learned that Gilman Louie, CEO of Spectrum Holobyte, was going to Japan to shop the game. Gilman Louie's first stop was the ASCII Corporation, one of the largest publishers in Japan. They declined Tetris, saying it was too retro. Their loss was Rogers' gain. Gilman Louie and Hank Rogers signed a letter of intent for Bulletproof Software to publish Tetris in Japan for just about every platform imaginable. Rogers' offer was standard, a cash advance, as well as royalties on every copy sold. Spectrum Holobyte had no plans for getting into the Japanese market, and Rogers seemed more than capable of delivering Tetris to the country. When Gilman Louie phoned Jim McConaughey at Mirrorsoft to tell him the news, he received a surprise. Rogers couldn't have the console and arcade rights for Japan because those were already sold. The buyer was Atari Games, which planned to publish the games under their subsidiary, Tengen. Like everyone else, engineers at Atari Games were playing the PC version of Tetris and were addicted. It became common water cooler talk at the office, which motivated Atari Games to grab the rights. To make matters worse for Rogers, Atari Games got it for a steal. In exchange for console and arcade rights in Japan and North America, Atari Games gave Mirrorsoft the PC rights to Blasteroids, a shallow update of the arcade game Asteroids. No royalties or cash to consider. Gilman Louie was furious, but there was nothing he could do. Mirrorsoft had more power thanks to their direct connection to the Maxwell Corporation. Louie phoned Hank Rogers to give him the news. Rogers could have the PC rights, but if he wanted the console and arcade rights, he would have to contact Atari Games. When Rogers contacted them and inquired about the rights, Atari Games declined. Undeterred, Rogers flew to California and camped out in the Atari Games parking lot. He waited for an opportunity to talk to their president, Hideyuki Nakajima. As Nakajima was leaving for the day, Rogers swooped in and made his sales pitch. Eventually, Nakajima agreed to a meeting. Over a sushi dinner, the two businessmen hashed out the details. Nakajima couldn't sell the arcade rights. He had already sold them to Sega. but he was willing to sell the console rights in Japan. Nakajima didn't care too much about having the console rights in Japan because he was focusing on the North American market. The price tag was steep. Rogers had to cough up $300,000 for the console rights, but he was confident the game was a hit. However, initial sales in Japan were low. Bulletproof Software only received 40,000 orders. Rogers contacted Nintendo President Hiroshi Yamauchi in hopes that he could help push the game. Yamauchi was curious, so he passed Tetris down to one of his designers, Shigeru Miyamoto. Several days later, Yamauchi asked Miyamoto if Tetris was a good game. "Yes," replied Miyamoto. When Yamauchi asked why, Miyamoto responded, "Because your secretaries and accountants are playing it." With that, Yamauchi understood Tetris's universal appeal, and he agreed to help push sales of Tetris. Orders increased from 40,000 to over 200,000. On December 22, 1988, Bulletproof Software released Tetris for the Nintendo Famicom, where it became their best-selling game of all time, selling 2 million copies. But it added yet another branch to a complicated tree of licensing and sub-licensing. Everything hinged on one contract: Robert Stein's deal with the Russians at Elorg. And that deal was in jeopardy. In 1988, Nintendo was on top of the video game world. They were on pace to sell 7 million Nintendo Entertainment Systems that year. Industry experts predicted the market for Nintendo games was larger than all home computer software, and they weren't done yet. Waiting in the wings at Nintendo of Japan was a new system, the handheld Game Boy. In North America, it was standard to package new Nintendo consoles with a game. But which one? In December of 1988, Hank Rogers was meeting with Nintendo of America President Minoru Arakawa at their headquarters in Redmond, Washington. When Rogers heard about their situation, he suggested Tetris. "If you include Mario, the Game Boy will be for little boys. But if you include Tetris, the Game Boy will be for everybody," he said. Arakawa was intrigued. He heard about the success of Tetris for the Famicom in Japan. Tengen was preparing to release Tetris for the Nintendo Entertainment System in North America, but the handheld rights were still up for grabs. Rogers was more than happy to help. He knew he could make millions in this deal, especially if Tetris was a packet title. After his experience getting the Tetris rights in Japan, he knew that Robert Stein was the man to talk to. Rogers called Stein and inquired about the handheld rights to Tetris. He offered $25,000 in advance. Stein, who still didn't have the handheld or arcade rights, was also fielding calls from Mirrorsoft asking for the handheld rights. He was wishy-washy in his response. He would have to check with the Russians and get back to Rogers. But Stein was about to hit another roadblock. Somewhere in the tangled web of licensing, Elorg wasn't getting paid. They tasked their new director, Nikolai Belikov, with sorting out the mess. Belikov was a large man with a reputation for being cutthroat. Pajitnov described him as an excellent actor. He was a worthy negotiator. Belikov read Stein and Elorg's contract, which was signed in May of 1988. It promised payment within 3 months. The payment was now 3 months overdue. Stein was stuck. He had Mirrorsoft and Hank Rogers wanting handheld rights. Unlicensed arcade versions of Tetris were already being sold. He figured his best chance to sort everything out was to fly to Moscow and meet with Belikov. Meanwhile, Hank Rogers felt ignored. He grew suspicious of Robert Stein. Not only that, but he got word that Gilman Louie of Spectrum Holobyte was trying to sell the handheld rights for Tetris to Nintendo. When Minoru Arakawa asked Rogers about it, Rogers was adamant. "I know Gilman doesn't have those rights. Give me a chance to finalize that deal." Rogers decided that it would be easier if he just dealt with the Russians himself and headed off to Moscow. In the UK, Mirrorsoft caught wind of Nintendo's interest in handheld rights. Parent company Maxwell Corporation sent Kevin Maxwell, the son of owner Robert Maxwell, to Moscow. Maxwell Corporation had connections with Russian diplomats and would have much more power securing the handheld and arcade rights. In February of 1989, all three men, Stein, Rogers, and Maxwell, flew to Moscow to get their piece of the Tetris pie. The battle for Tetris was about to begin. Hank Rogers arrived in Moscow without any clue where to go. He knew Stein was negotiating with Elorg, but he had trouble finding their whereabouts. At first, he tried to make friends by playing Go with some locals, but that got him nowhere. So Rogers hired an interpreter to help him find Elorg. After a day of riding around Moscow, they finally got the location. Hank Rogers walked into Elorg and asked to speak to someone about the rights to Tetris. As he waited in the lobby, he could feel the tension. "You don't walk into a place like that uninvited," he said. When Belikov was told a foreigner from Japan had come to discuss Tetris, he was surprised. It was against government protocol to meet with foreigners without proper clearance, but Belikov was curious and decided to meet him. If nothing else, having a third bidder for Tetris would help in his negotiations. Belikov met Rogers in the lobby. "Who are you?" he asked. Rogers took out a copy of Tetris on the Famicom and handed it to Belikov. "We are the biggest publisher of Tetris in the world right now," he boasted. Belikov looked at the game, confused. As far as he knew, no one had the console rights to Tetris. "Elorg hasn't given video game console rights to anyone," Belikov barked. Rogers made his case, explaining the chain of licensing and sub-licensing that gave him the rights. Elorg to Andromeda, to Mirrorsoft, to Tengen, to Bulletproof Software. Belikov was confused. He had never even heard of Tengen. The only rights were transferred to Andromeda Software, and only for using Tetris on personal computers. "You are illegally selling something that doesn't belong to you," he said. Rogers had come to Moscow to secure the handheld rights, but now he was in danger of losing everything. "Either I'm going to come out of here with the rights to Tetris, or I'm going to be in some gulag," he thought. After some discussion, Rogers and Belikov set up a meeting for the next day. The next day, Hank Rogers arrived at Elorg and was ushered into a large room with a massive table. On one end of the table was Elorg's negotiator Nikolai Belikov, Tetris creator Alexei Pajitnov, and several members of the Elorg team. Hank Rogers sat alone on the other side. Usually his sales pitches touched on his close connection with Nintendo and how they had a majority of the video game market share. But the Russians didn't know anything about Nintendo or the video game market. So he shifted gears and gave them a crash course on the video game business. Elorg showed Rogers their original contract with Robert Stein of Andromeda Software. Rogers scanned it and found the line that was causing all the trouble. The contract between Andromeda Software and Elorg stated that Stein had the rights to port Tetris to, quote, different types of computers. To the Russians, this meant exactly that, computer systems. To Stein, the distinction between computer system and console didn't exist. On top of that, Elorg was making pennies on Tetris. 1% of a percent. It was a horrible contract. Rogers made his case to Elorg, explaining his offer for handheld rights in detail. He offered a fixed amount for each cartridge sold. It was a nice change of pace after dealing with Robert Stein. Pajitnov in particular was impressed. Rogers understood the business end of things, but as a former developer, the two were kindred spirits. After Rogers' pitch, Belikov wanted to move forward and asked for a formal offer for handheld rights to Tetris. "Write everything down," he said. Belikov then asked Rogers when he would be back in Moscow. "Either I leave with the deal or without the deal. I'm not coming back," Rogers replied. After the meeting, Hank Rogers and Alexei Pajitnov continued talking. "Somehow we liked each other almost immediately. He was the friend I was looking for in Russia," said Rogers. That night, Pajitnov showed Rogers around Moscow. They explored the city, drank vodka, and discussed ideas for a sequel to Tetris. For Pajitnov, it was refreshing to have a casual conversation about his creation. "He offered me nothing and asked for nothing," he said. The two formed a friendship that would have a major impact on the future of Tetris. The next day, Rogers returned to Elorg with a one-page offer for the handheld rights to Tetris. Rogers knew Stein would be coming, so he added pressure by having the offer expire in 1 week. After his crash course on the video game business, Nikolai Belikov prepared for his upcoming meetings with Robert Stein and Kevin Maxwell. Belikov thought Stein was abusing his rights to Tetris. Stein reaped all the rewards, while the Russians got next to nothing. It was also apparent that Tetris creator Alexei Pajitnov preferred Rogers over Stein. It was time for the communists to play the game of capitalism. Robert Stein entered the Elorg offices with one goal in mind: to secure the handheld and arcade rights to Tetris. The arcade rights were especially important, considering Tengen and Sega were already selling machines. But Nikolai Belikov had other plans. Belikov presented Stein with their original contract. "Mr. Stein, tell me honestly, what is this document called?" he asked. "An agreement," replied Stein. "It's not an agreement," snapped Belikov. "It's a set of some irresponsible phrases or other, under which rights are transferred to one party without compensation for the other." Belikov presented Stein with an amendment to the original contract. Elorg wanted their money, so the amendment detailed penalties for late payment. Belikov refused to negotiate until Stein signed it. Stein agreed to read over the amendment and return in a few days. It wasn't the friendliest meeting, but Stein was confident that once all of this was smoothed over, he would secure the handheld and arcade rights. Belikov's next meeting was with Kevin Maxwell, the son of Maxwell Corporation owner Robert Maxwell. Robert Maxwell had connections to Russian bureaucrats, including General Secretary Mikhail Gorbachev. Mirrorsoft was confident that Kevin Maxwell would get the ball rolling in their favor to secure the handheld rights. Belikov began the meeting by sliding the Famicom Tetris box across the table. "What is this?" he bluffed. Maxwell had no idea. He guessed it was a pirated copy of Tetris. "Only more reason for Mirrorsoft and Elorg to make a deal and get rid of these fakes," he said. Maxwell's ignorance of the situation was his downfall. For Belikov, it was confirmation that no one had the home console rights to Tetris. It would be foolish for Belikov to completely blow off Maxwell, even if he knew he was full of it. Their connections to Russia were relevant, and they had deep pockets. If it was indeed a pirated copy of Tetris, Belikov said, then Mirrorsoft should make a bid for the home console rights. He threw in another deal as well. Elorg would receive publishing rights to several Maxwell Corporation reference books and encyclopedias. In exchange, Mirrorsoft was given a right of first refusal for any new rights to Tetris. Maxwell was satisfied with the arrangement and returned home, thinking he had moved things in a positive direction for Mirrorsoft. In reality, he had compromised everything. Back in his hotel room, Robert Stein read over the amendment to his original contract with Elorg. It was basically the same, plus some extreme penalties for late payments. Getting the arcade rights was crucial, and in order to get them, Stein had to sign the amendment. He signed it and returned to Elorg the next day. With that out of the way, negotiations could continue. But Belikov claimed Elorg wasn't ready to sell the handheld rights. The arcade rights, however, were for sale. The cost? $150,000 for advanced royalty payments, with a 6-week deadline. It was a lot of money, but at least Stein would avoid any licensing issues for Tengen and Sega's arcade version of Tetris. Stein returned home feeling satisfied. But there was one crucial detail Stein missed in the new amendment. Belikov added a definition for a computer, which said that a computer consists of a processor, monitor, disk drive, keyboard, and operating system. Since the document was backdated, it effectively stripped away all the console rights Stein thought he owned. The large penalties for late payments had all been a distraction. The Russians at Elorg had played the game of capitalism and won. After his meetings, Belikov called Rogers to inform him that Kevin Maxwell and Mirrorsoft also wanted the handheld rights for Tetris. "I can't outbid Maxwell, but I can give you honesty, and promised to pay you for each cartridge, said Rogers. Several days later, Rogers presented Elorg with a finalized contract and walked through every detail. It was official. Rogers and Nintendo secured the handheld rights to Tetris for the Game Boy. After signing the contract, Belikov presented Rogers with an offer. Make a bid on the home console rights to Tetris. Rogers knew Nintendo would be interested. Nintendo will outbid any competitor, Rogers said. Belikov asked for an offer in writing within 3 weeks. With that, the meeting was adjourned. Rogers headed back to Japan. He had no time to spare. As soon as he got back to Japan, Hank Rogers phoned Minoru Arakawa at Nintendo of America with the news. Nintendo not only had the handheld rights to Tetris, but due to contractual issues, they had a chance to snag the home console rights as well. Arakawa relayed the message to Nintendo of America Vice President Howard Lincoln. Lincoln's eyes lit up. This deal could make millions for Nintendo. It would also be sweet revenge against Atari Games, a former Nintendo licensee that was now suing them for $100 million. The suit stemmed from Atari Games' frustration with Nintendo's licensee policies. They alleged antitrust violations and unfair competition. At the same time, Atari Games released a batch of unlicensed games under their subsidiary, Tengen. They were the very first unlicensed games on the Nintendo Entertainment System. One of Tengen's upcoming releases was the console version of Tetris. Taking Tengen's rights to Tetris would hurt, and Lincoln knew it. So they sent Rogers back to Moscow to make a formal offer. With him was a high-profile attorney who had previously worked in the Soviet Union and was fluent in Russian. Their offer to Elorg was incredible. $5 million. Guaranteed. As promised, Belikov contacted Mirrorsoft for right of first refusal. On March 15, 1989, he sent them a telex and gave them 1 day to respond with a counteroffer. When nothing came back, Elorg was ready to sign the deal with Nintendo. Due to the enormous amount of money at stake, a Nintendo employee had to sign the contract. Lincoln and Arakawa went themselves. They traveled in secret. Any chance of Atari Games finding out could jeopardize the agreement. They told Nintendo of America employees they were traveling to Japan and took off for Moscow. Negotiations continued when they arrived. Lincoln was sure Atari Games would come after them. He wanted a clause stating that the Russians would help defend their rights in any litigation. Lincoln also suggested royalty payments to Alexei Pajitnov for creating the game. Belikov found the suggestion inappropriate. Pajitnov had made the game on company time. It belonged to the state. Belikov suggested that Elorg could make the cartridges. They even inquired about making their own version of the Nintendo Entertainment System. Nintendo declined. During the final stage of negotiations, Jim McConnachie of Mirrorsoft finally returned the telex message to Elorg. As far as McConnachie was concerned, Mirrorsoft already had the console rights. Elorg must be mistaken. That was all Elorg needed to hear, and on March 22, 1989, Nintendo and Elorg signed an agreement for the home console rights to Tetris. That same day, Belikov fired off another telex to Mirrorsoft and Robert Stein. The home console rights and handheld rights to Tetris were no longer available. They belonged to Nintendo. Robert Stein was dumbfounded. I was so focused on getting what I wanted that I forgot about watching what they wanted, he said. He felt he was the victim of lying, backstabbing, and cheating. He accused Hank Rogers of colluding with the Russians on the amended contract. He also argued that Kevin Maxwell's meeting with Belikov had screwed everyone over. He was burying me, burying us all, Stein said. At least there was a small consolation prize. Stein still had the home computer and arcade rights to Tetris. Kevin Maxwell was furious when he heard the news. You are now in grave breach twice over of our agreements with you, he said in a reply telex to Elorg. He also threatened to get Soviet authorities involved. He wasn't bluffing. The Russian government questioned Nikolai Belikov. They searched his files, but Belikov stood his ground and assured Nintendo that they would honor their commitment. When Kevin Maxwell told his father the news about Tetris, he reportedly, quote, went apeshit. Robert Maxwell took his anger all the way to Mikhail Gorbachev, now General Secretary of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev had more important matters at hand. His country was on the verge of collapse. You should no longer worry about the Japanese company, Gorbachev told Maxwell. And with that, Mirrorsoft gave up the fight for Tetris. On March 31st, 1989, President Hideyuki Nakajima of Atari Games received a surprising fax from Howard Lincoln of Nintendo of America. It was a cease and desist, ordering them to halt from any further manufacture, advertisement, promotion, offer for sale, or sale of Tetris for the NES or any other home system. The rights now belonged to Nintendo. We knew we had those bastards by the balls, said Lincoln. On April 6, 1989, Nintendo sent out an official press release announcing plans to release Tetris that summer on the NES. The next day, Atari Games, via their subsidiary Tengen, sent a reply to Nintendo. We are in receipt of your letter, and quite frankly, are quite confused. As Nintendo has known since last year, Tengen received all NES rights to the game Tetris in early 1988. These rights are, in Tengen's view, clear and unequivocal. But Atari Games was panicking. A week later, they filed a copyright application for their version of Tetris. On April 18th, they sued Nintendo for infringing on their licensing deal for Tetris. Almost everything was at stake. Atari Games anticipated Tetris to be a colossal hit that would break the shields of the Nintendo juggernaut. They assigned veteran programmer Ed Logg to program the NES version from the ground up. They spent a substantial amount of money on marketing. They took out a full-page ad in USA Today. They produced 300,000 copies of Tetris. They even held a huge launch party at the Russian Tea Room in New York City. On May 17, 1989, in the midst of their legal battles, Tengen released Tetris on the Nintendo Entertainment System. As expected, it flew off the shelves, selling 150,000 copies within weeks. Meanwhile, Howard Lincoln headed back to Moscow with a team of lawyers to prepare for the upcoming battle. They interviewed everyone they could: Alexei Pajitnov, Nikolai Belikov, and employees of Elorg and the Russian Academy of Sciences. They combed over every copy of the contracts between Robert Stein and Elorg. On June 15, 1989, Tengen and Nintendo opened their arguments in the U.S. District Court of Northern California. Presiding over the case was Judge Fern Smith, the same judge in charge of their other lawsuit dealing with the unlicensed Tengen games. Both Nintendo and Atari Games filed preliminary injunctions, which would prevent the other from selling their version of Tetris. Atari Games argued that their license for Mirrorsoft was valid, and that the Russians were double-dipping. Nintendo argued that the Russians never intended to sell anything other than the home computer rights to Mirrorsoft. But the smoking gun was the amended contract, which defined a home computer system. The NES definitely did not match that definition. On June 22nd, Judge Fern Smith reached her decision. She granted Nintendo a preliminary injunction, barring Atari Games from selling their version of Tetris. The trial was scheduled for later that year in November. It was a huge blow to Atari Games. By then, almost half of the initial 300,000 copies had been sold, leaving them with a warehouse full of games. When consumers heard the news, people rushed to snag their own copy. Many who borrowed the game from rental stores simply kept it, happily paying the replacement fee. On July 31st, 1989, Nintendo unleashed the Game Boy in North America, bundled with a copy of Tetris. Nintendo felt their case had clear and compelling evidence. They asked Judge Fern Smith for a summary judgment, which would end the trial before it began. To their surprise, Judge Fern Smith agreed. On November 13, 1989, she ruled that Nintendo owned the home console rights to Tetris. Atari Games announced they would appeal, but later decided against it. They destroyed all of their remaining warehouse copies of Tetris. That same month, Nintendo released their version of Tetris on the NES. It would go on to sell more than 5 million copies. The battle for the addictive Russian puzzle game was finally over. Hank Rogers' prediction that Tetris would make the Game Boy appeal to everyone was correct. By 2003, Nintendo sold over 118 million Game Boys. 35 million of them were bundled with Tetris. Although Nintendo emerged as the clear victors, just about everyone involved, Robert Stein, Spectrum Holobyte, Beersoft, Hank Rogers, Elorg, and Atari Games, made money on Tetris. Everyone, that is, except its creator, Alexei Pajitnov. By 1989, he had collected nothing from Tetris and was still working at the Russian Academy of Sciences. He was married with 2 children. But in 1991, his fortunes changed. Hank Rogers was determined to help his friend. He helped Pajitnov and his family immigrate to the Seattle area, where Pajitnov founded his own software company. In 1995, the rights to Tetris expired, which gave Pajitnov the opportunity to finally cash in on his creation. By that point, Elorg was a private company, still under the direction of Nikolai Belikov. Elorg purchased 50% of the rights to Tetris. Rogers and Pajitnov partnered up and formed the Tetris Company, and purchased the other half. After 13 long years, Alexei Pajitnov finally received royalty payments for his game. To this day, the Tetris franchise has sold more than 170 million games, making it the 7th best-selling video game franchise of all time.
Tetris. We all know it, and we all love it. Few games have had the lasting legacy of Tetris. There have been versions released on nearly every console and smartphone ever made. And to this day, these new versions remain popular among fans and casual gamers alike. But perhaps the most well-known version of Tetris is the version released on the Nintendo Entertainment System back in 1989. Gamers never stopped playing it ever since its initial release, and in recent years, it's absolutely exploded in popularity. There are huge in-person tournaments, monthly competitions online, and most importantly, a crazy chase for the high-score world record. This record has had 35 years of history, featuring some of the best players to ever pick up an NES controller. And it has one of the most insane stories from start to finish that I've ever seen. This is the history of NES Tetris World Records. There are 2 main concepts to understand in NES Tetris: the scoring and the level system. We'll start with the scoring. Like with most versions of the game, you accumulate points in NES Tetris by clearing lines. You get a different amount of points depending on how many you clear at once, but by far the most valuable score is getting a Tetris. The only way to score one of these is by using the long piece vertically to clear 4 lines. So ideally, players try to score as many Tetrises as possible by leaving a column open on the right side to drop a long bar when it comes. Then there's the level system. The higher the level, the more points you get per line cleared. So ideally, you want to start on the highest level possible, which is level 19. However, on level 18, blocks descend a row every 3 frames, while starting on level 19, they descend a row every 2 frames, which is significantly harder. So, top players would generally start on level 18, where they could play for a while at a more reasonable speed at barely any score cost. After 130 lines cleared at level 18, the game transitions to level 19, and then moves up a level for every additional 10 lines. Luckily, levels 19 through 28 all have the same descent speed, although you keep earning more points as the level increases. This is an extremely brutal speed to play on, but if you manage to make it all the way through level 28, you reach level 29, also known as Tetris's kill screen. A kill screen is a level deep into a game that's usually impossible to beat because of a glitch. Pac-Man has the most famous one. The game's 256 board has a glitched right side and doesn't spawn all the dots needed to beat it. Donkey Kong has another example, where you run out of time just seconds into the game's 117th screen. Tetris's kill screen, on the other hand, has nothing to do with the glitch. It's the intended end to the game, because starting on level 29, pieces begin to fall so fast that it becomes unplayable. This is Tetris's kill screen. Even if you begin holding a direction before the piece spawns, it's physically impossible to move the piece to the side in time. Pieces descend a row every single frame, twice the speed of level 28. Now, it's actually possible to process what's happening at this speed and know where you want the pieces to go. But the fact is, you just can't get them there. It's a game hardware limitation rather than a human hardware limitation. If you're very lucky, you might not need to move your pieces far and you can clear a line or two. But just like Pac-Man or Donkey Kong, your game is bound to end within seconds after reaching Tetris's kill screen. So the game is definitely over at level 29. But before that point, you have 230 lines to work with and try to score as many points as possible. And it just so happens that the point display in the upper right corner only has 6 digits, meaning the highest score it can display is 999,999 points. So naturally, the question arose, was it possible to max out the score before the kill screen kicked in? Well, in order to get a max out, you have to make the most of the 230 lines. That means getting as many Tetrises as possible, while avoiding other clears that eat into your 230 lines, otherwise known as a burn. It's extremely risky to play this way. You might need to build your stack up very high while waiting for a long bar. And there's not a moment of rest. You can't break your focus for even a second. But as brutal as the difficulty is, it's technically just possible to max out the score before the kill screen kicks in. And there are actually reports of people doing it all the way back in the 90s. It's difficult to determine how to treat these claims. Standards were different back then, and none of these claims have a full video to go along with them. However, some have more proof than others. Thor Ackerland, winner of the 1990 Nintendo World Championships, is reported to have maxed out the game in the early 90s. He didn't record his game, but being the literal winner of the Nintendo World Championships, he was one of the best Tetris players in the world at the time. Judging by his skills and the testimony of people who watched him play, it's very likely that his claim was legitimate. Another max out claim appeared in a 1992 edition of Nintendo Power magazine from a player named Scott Anderson. Very little is known about Anderson today, but in order to get your score in Nintendo Power, you did need to have photo proof, so there's a decent chance his score was legit too. And another player, JW Tetris, claimed a max out back in 1996 that seemed to have no proof, but 25 years later, he managed to uncover a VHS tape of the end screen that, sure enough, showed all nines. While it still lacks concrete video proof, this is probably the claim with the most evidence, and is very likely legit. Then, by the 2000s, all sorts of max-out claims appeared on internet forums. None of them had video proof, and honestly, they're really hard to judge. Some seem more suspicious than others, but just like with the claims from the 90s, it's really impossible to say which of these internet claims were legit. Some provided their names, while others used pseudonyms or usernames. In 2001, a Max Out claim popped up on PlutoVScene.com from someone named Jonas. Just like all the other claims, Jonas didn't have any proof to back up his score, so his claim was lumped in with all the rest. However, in 2005, a man named Trey Harrison was trying to accumulate videos of Tetris performances to put up on his website, TetrisMaster.com. He was looking for a recorded Max Out, and sure enough, in the replies, up pops Jonas again, saying he just recorded one on tape. Jonas dropped the video off at Trey's house. Trey uploaded it onto his website. And it was then that the world was first able to see on video a Max Out score of NES Tetris. A score showing all nines by future Tetris legend, Jonas Neubauer. What you're watching is a massive piece of gaming history. These scores have been rumored for over a decade, but finally, one was captured on video. And the footage is very impressive. Jonas started on level 18, and to make the level transition, he first had to clear 130 lines. He ended up getting 92 of those lines via Tetrises for maximum points, while just 38 were from birds. From there, Jonas was playing at the brutal speed of level 19, but he still had to keep landing Tetrises. His score was inching up as the levels climbed higher. He needed the Max Out before hitting level 29. On level 28, he was still 60,000 points away, with only 10 lines to work with. But he managed to get one Tetris, and then with just a single line to go before the transition, he got one final Tetris. The kill screen kicked in, and the score read all nines. Over the course of 8.5 minutes, Jonas had hit a Max Out on NES Tetris. And finally, it was documented for anyone to see. The feedback online was all positive. Everyone was thrilled to be able to watch an official Tetris Max Out. However, this video did have one problem. There was no game audio included. That meant Jonas couldn't submit it as a world record anywhere. But that didn't take away from the legitimacy of the performance. Jonas Neubauer had established a name for himself as a Tetris master. Only question was, now that someone had maxed out the game, what was there left to do? Over the following few years, while competitive retro gaming was still in its infancy, more people gravitated toward playing NES Tetris. Even though Jonas had maxed out the score, it remained a popular game, and others tried to replicate his achievement. Between 2008 and 2014, more than a dozen other people were able to achieve max outs in NES Tetris. And even though their scores were officially tied, there were still ways to compare max outs to each other. Ultimately, two different methods of competing became popular. Method number 1, going for the earliest possible max out. In Jonas's game from 2005, he hit the max out right as the level transitioned to 29. In other words, at the last possible moment. But the more Tetrises you hit, the earlier you can max out, and the more impressive the achievement. In April 2009, Harry Hong produced the first recorded max out with game audio, and he was able to get the max out slightly earlier than Jonas, late in level 28 rather than on the transition into level 29. Harry was one of several people who claimed to max out on internet forums years prior, but now he had recorded proof too. In early 2012, a player named Matt Bucco recorded a game where he maxed out in mid-level 26, much quicker than previous max outs. He landed Tetris after Tetris starting at level 19, which is where he pulled away from previous players. And then, there were a couple claimed early max outs. Harry Hong claimed an early level 26 max out on tape, but he didn't upload the score. openly claiming it on a Tetris forum. And in August 2014, a player named Terry Purcell reportedly maxed out in late level 25. This score used to have video, but it's since been deleted from YouTube. Most of these players' only goal was to get an early max out. As soon as that happened, they stopped playing and let the game end, even if it was several levels before the kill screen. However, not everyone did this, and that's why there was a second method of competing. Playing the game all the way to the kill screen and then manually calculating the score later. In other words, trying for the highest score possible. Even though the score doesn't display higher than all nines, you can still add up all the points achieved after this to determine your true score. For instance, in Jonas's first ever max out, he got a Tetris while his score read this. That meant he added 36,000 points, and his score actually finished at 1,018,160 points. And so, this became another method of determining whose max out was best. In 2008, Jonas achieved another kill screen that finished slightly higher than his 2005 max out, 1,023,860 points. However, since he used a camera from the 1800s, this was never verified as an official world record. In 2011, while recording himself for a documentary, Thor Ackerland achieved a score of 1,043,000 points. And a couple years later, a player named Ben Mullen took the score even higher, 1,071,000 points, before the kill screen took over to end his game. However, if the players going for the earliest max out had finished out their games, it's possible they would have achieved higher scores than these. Terry Purcell's level 25 max out is reported to have finished all the way at 1.195 million, but without video proof, this can't be verified. And although Matt Buko's score of level 26 cuts off right here, he claims to have kept playing this game all the way to the kill screen. And in the comments, he says he'd upload the rest when he got home. Well, it's 12 years later, and apparently Matt still hasn't returned home. So, the community was split between these two methods. Some wanted to go for the earliest max out, while others wanted to go for the highest score. The big problem was the score display. Since it only had 6 digits, it wasn't intuitive to keep playing after it maxed out. It led to 2 different sides of competitive play. And these sides wouldn't converge until one key event in 2015. This is a Game Genie code discovered by Max Out player Josh Tolles. It changes the leading digit of the score into hexadecimal, meaning that after 9, the score keeps counting up. A represents 1 million, B represents 1.1 million, and so on. This meant that the max out no longer applied, and the score was no longer capped at 1 million. So, it ultimately garnered the nickname the Uncapped Code. Josh posted his code on the Tetris forums, and it was treated as a fun novelty, but some saw potential for more with it. And in April 2015, Harry Hong began attempts to set a new high score with the Uncapped Code. On April 23rd, he played a game that maxed out in level 28, then took it to the kill screen and finished with 1,101,000 points. This was the first verifiable game to score over 1.1 million. And a few days later, he got one even better. A max out in level 26 that ultimately finished at 1,150,000 points. But after these records from Harry, the competition for the high score record died down. Harry Hong was one of few players who both cared about the high score record and was potentially good enough to improve it. So, when he stopped trying for it, there was no competition to take it from it. Instead, in 2016, he came up with the goal of achieving as many max outs as he could in a year, rather than improving the uncapped record. 268 max outs later, the high score remained at 1.15 million. But in 2017, Harry came up with a new goal for his stream. He was going to go back to playing with the Uncapped Code and try for a 1.2 million point game. This would surpass the highest claims from over the years and be an undisputed world record. Harry played for weeks, building up his skills but falling short of the 1.2. He'd need an early max out in level 25 or better, and then still need to land several more Tetrises before the kill screen. A score like this demanded near perfection. But after months of attempts, on April 14th, 2017, Harry got a good score going. A max out in mid-level 25, Harry was on pace for it. From this point, he needed at least 5 Tetrises before hitting the kill screen on level 29. Harry got his Tetrises, but was still a few points short. With his stack building high, he desperately used a long bar to get a triple, but this activated the kill screen. He still needed 3,000 points. Harry had to find a way to clear 2 more lines while playing at kill screen speed.
Yes! Yes!
History was made. The congratulations poured in as Harry had taken Tetris to new heights. After all the max outs that came before him, from the internet claims to the ones with concrete proof, this one was the best of all. Except, it's never quite that easy with NES Tetris. There are reports that, around the time of Harry's 1.2, a player named Bo Steele achieved a 1.2 million game of his own. Nobody remembers what his exact score was, or what the level of proof was. But Bo is a verified max-out player, so his score claim isn't unreasonable. Still, Harry Hong gets the most credit for being the first to achieve 1.2 million. And he was one of the best players in the world. One of the few who was capable of a score this high. However, as good as Harry was, there was still another player who had potential to go even higher. See, every year since 2010, the biggest Tetris tournament was the Classic Tetris World Championship, where the best NES Tetris players in the world competed. Of the 7 annual tournaments by this point, 1 had been won by Harry Hong. As for the rest, all 6 were won by the same player, Jonas Neubauer.
And your winner of the 2016 Classic Tetris World Championships, 6-time world champion, Jonas Neubauer!
In the 12 years since his first recorded max out, Jonas had turned into a monster. Every year, he went head-to-head against Tetris's best players. And time again, Jonas proved better than the rest. His stacking was brilliant. He was able to get out of trouble when others couldn't. Jonas Neubauer was simply considered the best NES Tetris player on Earth. Yet through all this, he'd never really cared about the score world record. He was more focused on tournaments. But in 2017, he started streaming on Twitch. And on July 24th, he booted up a casual game of Tetris. That was 17 straight Tetrises to open the game. Unbelievable. He slowed down a bit after that, but still managed to max out in mid-level 26. And then, he landed 6 more Tetrises before the kill screen. Jonas' score read all 9 since he wasn't using the uncapped code, but in reality, his score was 1,211,000 points. On a random game where he didn't even bother to use the uncapped code, Jonas had just set a new world record. After this, Jonas went back to focusing on tournaments, not caring to improve the high score record anymore. And while other players continued to put up new scores, some of which were over 1 million, very few were able to approach a score of 1.2 million. This type of game was reserved for only the best of the best Tetris players, and even they couldn't consistently put up scores like this. It took a lot of luck to get long bars when you need them. So, Jonas instead prepared for the 2017 Classic Tetris World Championship. And that November, he officially made it 7 World Championship victories.
There it is. Jonas is your champion, 2017 champion.
There was nobody else on his level. And in June 2018, a year after his 1.21 million game, Jonas set out to improve the score world record, trying to take it to a level where nobody else could even touch it. This time, Jonas wasn't messing around. He was using the uncapped code, so he could know right away what his score was. On June 13th, he got a really good game going, a max out in level 25. After landing 5 more Tetrises, his score was just short of 1.2 million, with only 4 lines until the kill screen. Jonas built a center well, waiting for the long bar that would push him over the top. And then, he got it.
Let's go!
New world record, 1.23 million. But Jonas wasn't satisfied yet. A week later, he managed another level 25 max out. He then got 6 more Tetrises, pushing his score past 1.2 million. 1 more Tetris, and he'd have another record. But then, his stack started going high. Jonas wasn't getting a long bar, and he was quickly running out of room. Yet, he didn't panic, and finally, the long bar came.
Oh, let's go! Get out of my face!
A 15,000 point improvement to the world record. This was the state of NES Tetris in mid-2018. There were many good players. Some of them could score over 1 million points. But when all else was held equal, Jonas usually came out on top. He always won the world championship. He had the score record, and it was intimidating to compete against him. It seemed like, as long as he wanted to hold the high score world record, he'd be able to do so. That is, unless Corian had something to say about it. In 2016, a player named Corian posted a video of his first NES Tetris max out. By this point, several players had achieved the max out, so the achievement alone wasn't too notable. However, when he posted a video with a hand cam, Corian was shown to be doing something very differently. He was mashing the D-pad to move the pieces laterally, rather than simply holding it down. In Tetris, there's a concept known as the delayed auto shift, or DAS. When you hold down the D-pad in NES Tetris, your piece will auto shift to the side every 6 frames, or 10 times per second. This is quite fast, and leaves you with enough time to navigate even on the breakneck speed of level 19. However, Corian is from Japan, and NES Tetris was never actually released in Japan. So, his background was from playing various other versions of Tetris, including the Game Boy edition. In Game Boy Tetris, when you hold down the D-pad, the piece hesitates momentarily and then moves roughly 7 times per second. This process is too slow when playing at higher levels, so Game Boy Tetris players have to repeatedly repress the D-pads and move their pieces quickly enough. And since Corian was used to playing this and various arcade games, it was only natural to match the D-pad in NES Tetris as well. But this actually gave Corian an advantage. He was able to accurately match faster than DAS normally moved the pieces. He could move blocks just a little bit quicker than normal. And it meant that once he reached the kill screen on level 29, he actually stood a chance to clear a few lines. He couldn't play for long, but it wasn't necessarily an instant game over. In June 2017, he managed to clear 10 lines on level 29 and reach level 30. Only a couple other players had ever done that before, and not surprisingly, they had to use a form of hyper-tapping to pull it off. Ultimately, though, this just let Corian get a few more points before topping out. If he wanted to beat the score world record, he needed to focus on getting more Tetrises before the kill screen. He spent months improving his skills, and by August 2017, he became the third player to pass 1.2 million. But as Jonas kept improving the record, Corian found himself falling behind. And by June 2018, the score to beat was 1.245 million. But Corian didn't want to give up. Even though he was a bit behind Jonas, the potential with hyper-tapping was just too strong. That summer, Corian began a push for the world record. And on June 24th, he had a strong game going. Landing Tetris after Tetris, Corian's score climbed past 600,000. Then, the game transitioned to level 19. This is where hyper-tapping would really come into play. Right away, he managed to get a long bar over in a spot that would have been risky with Das. He kept on going, precisely navigating pieces while frantically mashing on the D-pad. He ended up maxing out the score during level 25, just about tied with Jonas's world record. The Tetrises continued, and eventually, Corian found himself at 1.22 million, with only one line until the kill screen. He just needed one more Tetris. Corian was praying that it would come in time.
Freeze! Freeze, come on! Yes! Woo! Yes! 1.25. Woo!
This was the first ever game past 1.25 million. And finally, 7-time world champion Jonas had been dethroned. This game helped prove the use of hyper-tapping. While Corian wasn't guaranteed to have topped out with Das, there were definitely situations where hyper-tapping helped. The problem is, Corian was one of few players who could reliably hyper-tap. You not only had to match quickly, but also do it in a controlled manner to always move your piece the exact right amount. Corian focused on other categories for the next few months, but in early 2019, he came back, looking to take the record closer to 1.3 million. And on March 5th, he'd get a good chance. His start was very smooth, and the only sketchy moment came at 800,000, when he misdropped and then narrowly brought a long bar over to the right in time. That's where hyper-tapping can help you. He ended up maxing out the score in late level 25. With 30 lines until the kill screen, Corian had just enough room to get 8 more Tetrises and finish off one more improvement to the world record.
Yes! Yes! Updated my world record! Yes!
This was a really great game, yet still remained 27,000 points short of 1.3 million. That score still seemed like a pipe dream. The only way to do it would be to get an earlier max out, and then match Corian's 8 Tetrises afterwards. And with Corian being one of the few hyper-tappers with the skill to do that, 1.3 million was just a bit out of reach. A few months after Corian's 1.27 game, one of the strangest events in Tetris history took place. One day in June 2019, a man named Tyler Peach popped up in the Discord server. Tyler said he was from Germany, and that back in the mid-90s, he scored 1.33 million in a game of NES Tetris. This was a bold claim. For one thing, it was 60,000 points ahead of the current highest known score. And for another, the uncapped code didn't exist in the 90s. So how did he know what his exact score was? Tyler tried to convince people he was legit, but he came across as some random dude just making outrageous claims. So, to show his skills, Tyler said he would attempt to qualify for the July monthly tournament. And then... Tyler proceeded to post the highest qualifying score ever for a tournament. Only a handful of players have ever achieved the 1.2, and Tyler just did it on command to show his skills. He immediately began doing live streaming attempts to break the score world record, and just days later, he achieved a score of 1.298 million, smashing the world record by 25,000 points. He maxed out at level 24, one level sooner than Quarion did, and proceeded to match his 8 Tetrises afterwards. And while Tyler didn't use a webcam, it seemed that he too was hyper-tapping. He was able to get his pieces to fly across the board. Who on earth was this guy? Were his scores faked somehow? Nobody knew for sure, and the top players had a variety of opinions. But there was nothing in Tyler's gameplay that screamed it was fake. The circumstances were just so weird. A legend from the 90s, who nobody had heard of before, coming back and crushing the competition. The story sounded too insane to be real. Well, months down the road, the truth came out. Tyler's scores were 100% legitimate, but he wasn't a real person. Tyler was actually the alt account of one of the best Tetris players in the world. He was the teenage prodigy, Joseph Saley. Joseph came onto the Tetris scene in 2017 and spent hours watching the game's 2 best players, Jonas and Quarion. He learned a lot from them, and Joseph's skills rapidly improved. By March 2018, he achieved his first max out. By September, his score was up to 1.15 million. In less than a year, he had become a world-class player. However, there were still a handful of players who had a better score PB. But a few months later came the 2018 Classic Tetris World Championship. Joseph entered the tournament and played beautifully, defeating opponent after opponent and making it all the way to the finals. And what a surprise, the other finalist was Jonas Neubauer, the 7-time world champion. Jonas was heavily favored to defeat Joseph and take home his 8th title. But in a shocking twist, Joseph swept Jonas 3-0.
Jonas Tetris Joseph! In your hand, we have a new Tetris World Champion!
Joseph Saley was now a world champion. But despite that, he didn't have the score world record. That still belonged to Quarion. So, in early 2019, he made an effort to take it. First passing 1.2 million, then 1.25 million. But he still remained a bit short of the record. And that's where he decided to have some fun. Joseph started streaming attempts to an alt account and built up the Tyler Peach persona. And even though he didn't do many attempts there, one of them ended up breaking the world record. So, he decided to roll with it, before eventually revealing that he was behind it all. So now, Joseph had them both, the championship title and the score record. But even beyond that, Joseph had one specific skill that no other Tetris player had. He could actually play on the kill screen. Joseph was a hyper tapper, and a very good one at that. He moves pieces quicker than anyone else. The kill screen kicks in on level 29, and in September 2018, Joseph became the first person to make it to level 31 on video. A month later, he became the first to make it to level 32. It was amazing. Kill screens are not meant to be playable, but Joseph was doing it. He couldn't go for long, but he was legitimately clearing lines and even full levels. He was even outsmarting the developers. Upon reaching level 30, the game's level counter appears bugged. Tetris's programmers did not expect anyone to make it here. Joseph was doing what was thought to be impossible. But as impressive as this was, it wasn't enough to get the score record. Joseph would still have to maximize his Tetrises earlier to really rack up the score. And not only that, but he wasn't the only one gunning for the world record. Harry Hong and Quarion, 2 previous record holders in the category, were interested in trying as well. And so, it became a 3-way race between Harry, Quarion, and Joseph for the first 1.3 million score in NES Tetris. Harry was the first to strike. In August 2019, he got a new high score of 1.275 million. This was short of the 1.298 world record, but those who thought Tyler P was cheating considered this score the official world record. Still, it didn't reach 1.3 million. Harry would have needed one more Tetris before the kill screen to push him over the top. Instead, maybe Corion could get the 1.3. He was the more recent record holder, and his personal best remained at 1.273 million. Perhaps his hyper-tapping skills would be enough to get him there. In November, Corion had a great game going. He got a max out in level 25, then landed 7 Tetrises, pushing his score past 1.2 million. After getting another Tetris, Corion was in position to crush his PB and maybe get 1.3 million if he could just get one final Tetris.
ランズ少23頑張ろう ランズ少
Corion got a massive long bar drought and couldn't get the last Tetris he needed. But of the 3 players, the one with the best chance at 1.3 million was Joseph. He'd already gotten 1.298 million on the Tyler account. He only needed a tiny improvement to get him there. Well, that December, Joseph found himself in nearly the exact same position as Corion. A max out in level 25 and needing one more Tetris for 1.3 million. This could be it. But the long bar had to come in time.
Yes! Oh my god! Oh my god! Oh, Jesus Christ!
Joseph already had 1.3 million, but then he landed a Tetris on the kill screen. This move was only possible with good hyper tapping, not DAS. This gave him another 36,000 points and pushed him past 1.35 million. It was the first time anyone had ever gotten substantial points on the kill screen in a record, and it raised all sorts of questions. Was this move realistic to replicate? How many kill screen points could you get? And since he was past 1.35 million, could Joseph get the score record to 1.4 million? This score would have nearly sounded impossible just weeks earlier. But now, there was a blueprint. We'd already seen Joseph get 1.3 million points going into the kill screen. If he could land a few Tetrises and get 100,000 points on the kill screen, that would be enough for 1.4 million. Joseph was the only player who could realistically do this. And a few months later, when the pandemic hit, he decided to fully commit and make a push for the 1.4. This was going to be an intense grind. Joseph had to maximize points everywhere, both before and during the kill screen. For one thing, he decided to start on level 19 rather than 18. That meant the pieces fell faster, but it also allowed him to rack up more points, potentially 30 to 40,000 more than starting on level 18. And Joseph needed every point he could get. He couldn't afford to burn lines. He had to nearly exclusively go for Tetrises to maximize points. Yet, as tough as all this was, it was actually the easy part of the grind. The hard part was then scoring 100,000 more points on the kill screen. Joseph could score 1.3 million by level 29, but getting the last 100,000 at this speed was brutal. As fast of a hyper tapper as he was, the kill screen was still the kill screen. You're not intended to play at this level. And Joseph had run after run die after making it this far. Clearly, 1.4 million would require the stars to align. Well, that June, Joseph would get a chance. He got a max out in level 25 and arrived at the kill screen just shy of 1.3 million points. He'd been here before. Now, he had to make it to 1.4.
Oops. Hey, this world record though. Nice.
A new record, but Joseph seemed to barely care. It was still 25,000 short of 1.4 million. This game really illustrates the dilemma when playing on the kill screen. Do you try and keep your stack low to survive as long as possible? Or try to rack up points quickly by going for Tetrises? Eventually, Joseph found a solution. Why not just get to the kill screen with a crazy score so you don't need that many points?
No. It's not good. Oh my god. We're on record though. Dude.
This pace was insane. Even scoring just one Tetris on the kill screen would have been enough for 1.4. But Joseph couldn't survive long enough to get a Tetris. He topped out just 10,000 points short. Still though, clearly he was closing in on 1.4 million. It seemed like it could be just days away. Well, on June 14th, 2020, Joseph started a game on level 18 rather than 19 and set a score of 1.384 million. This was the highest ever score from a level 18 start, a notable achievement. So, Joseph stopped recording on OBS and uploaded the video to YouTube. But then, he forgot to hit record again and continued playing for the record. Joseph was oblivious to the fact that his gameplay wasn't being saved. And hours later, he allegedly achieved a score of 1.439 million. Obviously, this game can't be viewed today. He was streaming it to a Discord call though, and one of his friends was recording the audio of said call, where you can hear people freaking out at what Joseph was doing.
Oh my god. Oh my god. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? 1.4. Oh my god.
But there's no video to go along with this. According to testimony from those who watched it live, this was a crazy game in the kill screen. It allowed him to blow past the 1.4 million barrier, but only a select few were able to see it. And even though there's no recording, Joseph knew what he had done and had accomplished his goal. To this day, he's still never gotten a 1.4 on video. The following few months in 2020 were a strange time in Tetris history. Everyone knew the record was 1.4 million, but it technically wasn't official. It would still be a big deal the first time someone achieved 1.4 on video. That July, a player named Scotto Bozo tried using RNG manipulation to crush the world record. He was able to use a task to predict which pieces would come and plan ahead accordingly. However, his score of 1.5 million was quickly deemed to be a different category. So, the focus was back on trying to break 1.4. And while there were many new players getting into the game, one stood above the rest. His name was Dog Playing Tetris. In June 2020, he became the second person ever to achieve a score of 1.3 million. He was trying to get 1.4 million alongside Joseph, and while Joseph stopped playing after his unrecorded 1.4, Dog continued trying. He was perceived as the most likely person to pull it off. Dog was a hyper tapper like Joseph, so he had the ability to play for a while on the kill screen. And by that fall, his score was up past 1.35 million. He was closing in, and his next PB could be the one. In October, he managed to get a max out early in level 24. This was definitely on pace for 1.4 million. But the Tetrises kept coming, and by the time he hit the kill screen, his score was already at 1.367 million. He only needed 33,000 points on the kill screen. Dog Playing Tetris had to hold it together. He missed it by 14,000. This was still a new high score, but not enough to break 1.4. Even months later, the world had yet to see a score over 1.4 million on video. The combination of getting to level 29 on a good pace and then getting enough points on the kill screen was just too much to ask. It almost mirrored the max out claims from decades prior. Even though a 1.4 million score had very likely happened, there was still no video of one for the world to see. It remained a nearly impossible score that existed only as a legend. Now, you might think this is all a build-up to someone finally breaking through, but that's not what happened. No, something much bigger was brewing in the background. While much of the community was focused on trying for 1.4 million, little did any of them know that Tetris was about to go through a revolution. Everything was about to change. For years, there had been two ways to play NES Tetris: DAS and hypertapping. DAS was certainly easier, but hypertapping had higher potential. That's how players were able to get points on the kill screen. Well, by 2020, the game's demographic at the top level had shifted younger, and virtually all of these new top players were hypertappers. In fact, during that year's Classic Tetris World Championship, all of the players in the top 8 were hypertappers. It had taken over at the top level. But as dominant as this technique was, it was quite difficult. Not many people could match that fast while still retaining good control. It limited the number of record contenders, and those who could hypertap sometimes developed arm and hand issues. Hypertapping was powerful, but it was still far from an ideal technique. So in 2020, the game's new generation began looking for alternative techniques to match the D-pad. The leading theory was to try using multiple fingers instead of just one. Gaming legend Flyheck had a method for using 8 fingers on an arcade button, letting it match up to 30 times per second. He also had a modified method for the smaller buttons of an NES controller. However, Tetris players had to match the D-pad, and they struggled to adapt either of these methods. The D-pad seemed to simply be too small to use multiple fingers on. They needed a bigger button. That's where a player named Cheese found something brilliant. He watched Flyheck's videos and a mashing video from Silverboxer, then combined them into his own technique. If the NES D-pad was too small of a button, why not use the entire back of the controller as a button? By resting a finger on the D-pad, you can roll your fingers along the back to push the controller into it repeatedly. This allows you to rapidly press the D-pad up to 4 times, or 5 times with a thumb at the end. That's just enough to move any piece to the far left or right, and you can reach speeds upwards of 20 presses per second, twice as fast as hypertapping. It's also much easier on the hand and arm, and allowed for much more precision. As soon as Cheese found this technique, he knew it had the chance to break NES Tetris. He had just discovered Tetris's third playstyle: rolling. While rolling clearly had the most potential of all 3 techniques, it was also quite tricky to learn. Even though Cheese had discovered rolling, he struggled to use it for the first few months, but he still had a head start over other players, and eventually, he started to get good with it. By early 2021, he was using it whenever he reached the kill screen. And it quickly became clear that he was able to do things that nobody else could. Cheese wasn't just playing on the kill screen, he was thriving. The best hyper-tappers could last a few levels on the kill screen, but with rolling, Cheese found himself making it all the way to level 40. And remember, the kill screen kicks in way back at level 29. Simply put, the kill screen had lost its meaning. It no longer marked the automatic end of your game. At least if you were able to roll like Cheese could. By mid-2021, Cheese had the potential to take the score record. And thanks to rolling, his strategy was much different than those who came before him. His emphasis was less on maximizing points before the kill screen, but rather going as deep as possible on the kill screen while landing Tetrises. This meant he wouldn't need such a crazy score going into level 29. If he could then last long enough on the kill screen, he could beat the score record anyway. That June, Cheese played games to qualify for the July monthly tournament. On June 30th, he got a game that reached 1 million points by level 26. This was roughly 200k behind the world record, but Cheese knew he could make up those points on the kill screen. He reached level 29 and immediately misdropped the J-piece. This could be a death sentence for a hyper tapper, but for a roller, it was an easy recovery. And from there, the gameplay just got crazier. $1.461 million. Cheese had just smashed the world record. He had just cleared 80 lines on the kill screen and gotten 5 Tetrises in the process. These were worth about 40,000 points each and were only realistic with rolling. For any top player who was still hyper-tapping, this game eliminated all doubt. Rolling was the future of NES Tetris. So, throughout 2021, the game's best players all improved that rolling. Previously, 1.4 million was about the limit for the score record, but now, there was no telling how high it could go. Cheese had made it to level 37, but if someone could last even longer on the kill screen, or get more points before the kill screen, then they could beat the world record. The big question was, who would be the next person to do it? Well, Dog playing Tetris was the winner of the most recent World Championships, while players Pixelandy and Huffaluffagus came in 2nd and 3rd place. Meanwhile, Cheese was still an active player, and he was the best at rolling. All 4 of these players were top contenders, and they each had a good chance at raising the score record. However, in a surprise to most of the community, a player named Hydrant Dude moved into 2nd place right behind Cheese. Hydrant Dude was more known for his contributions other than his gameplay. He made numerous ROM hacks of Tetris, and later published videos explaining the game's code and inner workings. Beyond that, he was also a good player, but not usually considered one of the absolute best in the world. But that changed when he posted a score of 1.445 million, because Hydrant Dude had developed one particularly important skill. He was really good at rolling. And that meant he could last a long time on the kill screen. Now just 16,000 points behind the record, Hydrant Dude pushed onward. And in September, he had a game that entered the kill screen at just over 1.1 million points. This pace was nothing too special, and he'd need more than 300,000 more points to break the record. But Hydrant Dude decided to take a different approach now. Instead of going for Tetrises, he was going to try to last as long as possible. He would have to survive for probably 15 or so levels if he wanted to accumulate 300,000 points. But like I said, Hydrant Dude was really good at rolling.
There you go. There's a 19 people. Is that world record? Did I actually just...
2 years ago, Hydrant Dude believed 1.4 million would never happen. Now, he had just broken the world record with 1.464 million points, and he had survived all the way to level 44. At this point, it was seeming increasingly likely that 1.5 million was on the horizon. Although Hydrant Dude had survived so long on the kill screen, his pace entering it wasn't anything special. If he could score a few more points beforehand, 1.5 million could be a reality. Well, Hydrant Dude kept playing, and just a few days later, he got the pace he was looking for. 1.35 million entering the kill screen. This was nearly 250,000 ahead of the world record. After landing 3 Tetrises on the kill screen, and making it to level 41, Hydrant Dude finally topped out, but his score wasn't 1.5 million. It was 1.6 million. He had skipped straight over an F score and rolled the hexadecimal digit back to 0. This was the first ever rollover in NES Tetris history, and it was also a 160,000 point increase over the world record. Hydrant Dude had proven that he was no fluke. His Tetris skills were legit. But he also had some heavy competition. As more time passed, the top players got better and better at rolling. And by late 2021, Hufflepuffus was making a run at the record. Huff was already a world-class hyper tapper, finishing second place in the 2020 World Championships. But once rolling became dominant, he made the switch in technique and was able to nearly reach 1.4 million. Huff was notably a very conservative player on the kill screen. He played even safer than Hydrant Dude, rarely going for Tetrises and just trying to survive. In November 2021, Huff had a game that reached the kill screen at 1.15 million. This was nearly 200,000 behind the record and didn't seem to have much of a chance. But then he put his survival mode into full effect, and the level counter climbed higher and higher. Level 35, then 40, and then 45. Huff had only landed 2 Tetrises, but he was somehow closing in on the record. A couple minutes later, Huff reached level 50. This was the highest level anyone had ever reached in NES Tetris. Finally, on level 52, Huff topped out. His score, 1.676 million, a new world record for score, level, and points on the kill screen. His survival playstyle had worked to perfection, and it was unbelievable to watch. He'd lasted through 23 levels on the kill screen. Rolling had forever changed NES Tetris. Gone were the days of needing to squeeze out every point before the kill screen ended your game. Now, players could just survive longer to make up those points. How high could this score go? By late 2021, the Tetris community was thriving. This was the most active it had ever been, and there was lots of competition for the score record. Rolling had given players who couldn't hypertap a second chance. They too now had a chance to snag the world record. And even though the top score was 1.67 million, it was climbing so fast that it seemed like a 2 million point game wasn't far away. However, over the next few months, it became very hard to track what the game's true world record was, all because of a practice known as vaulting. See, Cheese had a habit of playing games, sometimes even getting a world record score, and then only telling certain friends about it. Sometimes he did eventually upload his scores, and other times he didn't. Cheese gave various reasons for doing this. To better space out YouTube uploads, to make memes with his friends, and sometimes just because he could. So, we don't have a perfectly accurate record timeline, but we do know bits and pieces of it. In late 2021, Cheese allegedly achieved a new record of 1.7 million and didn't upload the video. However, it's unclear if this was before or after Huff's 1.676 million game, and we don't know what Cheese's exact score was. That being said, Cheese didn't vault all of his scores. He was an amazing player, and sometimes he had to play live, like when he had to qualify for a tournament. Since this was a qualifier, Cheese was just going for a decent score, not anything crazy. Well, 9 minutes later, he entered the kill screen at just 1.075 million. A good qualifying score, sure, but this was the lowest score at this point compared to any world record in the last 10 years. So, if he wanted a record here, this game would have to go deep. Cheese needed to pull off a miracle on the kill screen. For the next 13 levels, it wasn't looking like a miracle, but Cheese was surviving. He wasn't landing any Tetrises, so he didn't get many points, but he also wasn't topping out. Then, suddenly, he misdropped in level 43, and things got ugly fast. His stack piled high, and it looked like this was the end. Cheese's score was at 1.3 million, a fantastic qualifying score. He hadn't hit any Tetrises on the kill screen, and he was way short of the world record. Nobody would blame Cheese for just topping out here and being satisfied. But instead, he did this.
Let's go! Oh my god, 2 million!
This is insanity, honestly. I never expected to get this high of a score. GG. That's a good game. Best game I'll ever play.
Cheese went from 0 Tetrises at 1.3 million points to 11 Tetrises at 2.3 million points. This was the biggest world record increase in the game's history, and also the first time anyone had ever reached level 60. Just a legendary game. The community was shaken. This score was so far ahead of anyone else. It was hard to imagine playing for so long while also landing Tetris after Tetris. The inventor of rolling had just mastered his craft. And over the next several months, Cheese's 2 million score stood alone. While others tried and did improve their scores, none were able to crack 2 million. The world record remained a major outlier. Yet, despite this, Cheese was able to improve it once again. In January 2022, he set a new high score of 2.7 million. Unfortunately, this was another vaulted score. The video of the game has never been made public, and what little info we do have comes from the description of Cheese's 2.3 million game. Then, a few months later, Cheese got a score of 2.34 million points on video while qualifying for the April tournament. This eked out his highest recorded game, but was well short of his 2.7 million vaulted score. But no matter which of these 3 games you look at, Cheese was the premier player of NES Tetris. Nobody else could roll as long and as consistently as he could. That's why he was the only player getting scores like this. But still, while they lagged behind Cheese, other players were improving their rolling skills. And with tournaments happening every month, there was active competition for the score record. One such competitor was Eric ICX. Eric was a good player, and he'd set some community milestones over the years. As a hyper tapper, he was the first person to reach levels 37 and 38. And while he was a good roller too, he lagged behind most other top players. His high score was just short of 1.5 million, and in 13th place overall. Well, on April 1st, 2022, Eric got a great game going. He entered the kill screen at 1.282 million points, a fantastic pace. Minutes later, he passed 1.5 million and broke his personal best. And then, Eric went on what can only be described as a miracle run. He landed a Tetris on level 46, then another on level 58. In level 64, he'd been playing for so long that his camera shut off, and moments later, he broke Cheese's recorded world record of 2.34 million. This was unreal. Eric was great, but he was not expected to be a world record contender. He hadn't even gotten 1.5 million before. Now, his score was passing 2.4 million, with no signs of stopping anytime soon. By this point, another concept had come into play: scaling. As mentioned earlier, when you get a Tetris, the amount of points it's worth is determined by this formula. Basically, the higher the level, the more points you get. When Eric first entered the kill screen on level 29, his Tetrises were worth 36,000 points. But now entering level 70, any Tetris would be worth 84,000 points. And as the level climbed higher, these Tetrises became even more valuable. That's what scaling is. It's essentially the opposite of diminishing returns. The longer you play, the quicker your score rises. And that's exactly what happened to Eric. By the time he hit level 73, he had passed Cheese's vaulted score of 2.73 million. This game was now the undisputed world record, and it was still going. Eric passed level 80, and then level 90. In level 92, he managed to hit a Tetris worth over 112,000 points. Finally, in level 95, Eric topped out. His final score was 3.772 million. Eric had just broken the world record by over 1 million points. He had more than doubled his own personal best, and he had achieved the game's first ever double rollover. The hexadecimal digit rolls over for a second time at 3.2 million. When he posted his score to Discord, many dismissed it as an April Fool's joke, but they quickly realized this was legit. The world record had been shattered, and Eric was the new champion. So, what did this mean for the Tetris community? Was the world record now unbeatable? Well, look, getting a game to level 95 like Eric did would be close to impossible. This game was such an outlier that even Tetris's best players couldn't make it near that deep. But Eric's score was a different story. Scaling made it so that Tetrises were worth 100 grand by the end of the game. So if someone could reach level 70 or 80 again and land a few more Tetrises than Eric, their score could shoot up past 3.7 million without having to make it as deep as level 95. It wasn't likely, but there was a path to beating his world record. And over the next few months, some of the game's top players tried. They worked on surviving on the kill screen for as long as possible. Even if they didn't need to make it to level 95, they still had to last a long time. But ultimately, nobody could do it. And Eric's legendary 3.7 million score stayed on top. But of course, the NES Tetris community is much bigger than this one world record. Tournaments have always been a big part of Tetris, and each month there was a Masters tournament featuring most of the game's top players. The majority of these tournaments aren't important for this video, but there's one match in the August 2022 edition that we need to take a look at. It was a battle between two titans, Huff, the former world record holder, and Eric, the current record holder. And they were going to compete head-to-head in a best-of-5. Eric's 3.7 million score still stood as the world record, but Huff was the only player who would come close to him. His personal best of 3 million points was in second place. These were quite possibly the two best Tetris players in the world, trying to score as high as they could against each other. Game 1 went to Eric. Game 2 began, and it looked like a repeat of Game 1. Both players were locked in and made it to the kill screen. But this time, Huff had a slight lead over Eric, 1.1 million to 950k. They both survived to level 40, with Huff retaining his point lead. A few minutes later, both players arrived at level 50, and at this point, the game was entering rare territory. In the entire history of Tetris monthly tournaments, only 4 games had ever survived to level 50. The fact that this one had both players still alive was astounding. But Huff and Eric weren't done yet. A few levels later, they both rolled over the score. Huff still had a 100,000 point lead, but Eric wasn't backing down. As they both hit level 60, the game entered legendary status. This had become much more important than just a tournament match. Eric and Huff were so locked in that there was no telling how high they'd go. They kept cruising through the 60s. But suddenly, on level 66, Huff needed to get a long bar all the way to the left. He started his roll too late, and it was all over. Huff topped out after an incredible performance all the way to level 66. Eric now needed just 100,000 more points to win the game, but he was already in rare territory. This chart shows all games that have made it to the kill screen in the last year of monthly tournaments. Making it past level 40 was very rare, while making it past level 50 was almost unheard of. The best tournament game ever made it to level 67. Huff had made it to level 66, just one level short. And yet, Huff ended up losing this game to Eric. Here's why. This is how far Eric ended up making it. According to Eric, once he broke the score record in level 105, his nerves went away. At that point, he was playing with the house's money. And that's what ultimately allowed him to play another 40 levels without topping out. Meanwhile, all Huff could do was watch. He simply looked on in astonishment as Eric completely destroyed the game in front of him. And at the end, he applauded Eric, said cheers, and sat back in his chair. People had known NES Tetris would eventually get to this point, but Eric had rapidly accelerated that timeline. The goal was simple: last as long as possible on the kill screen. And while the best players have been able to survive for 10, even 15 minutes before, Eric had just survived for 28 minutes, double anyone else's best performance. In case there was any doubt, this game had made it crystal clear. The days of needing to maximize your score early with Tetrises were now over. Now, Tetris was a game of survival and endurance, and nobody else could keep up with Eric. Eric had made it to level 146. However, the game's developers never intended anyone to make it past level 29, since the kill screen speed kicks in. And from level 30 onwards, they never checked that all their code still operated correctly. Now, most things still work fine, but gradually, as you get deeper and deeper beyond level 29, Tetris begins to break more and more. The first sign of this is the level counter appearing bugged starting on level 30. The game plays exactly the same, except with this one graphical glitch. But upon reaching level 138, the game starts to deteriorate a bit more. Tetris normally has 10 color palettes, one for each of the levels 0 through 9, that then loop every 10 levels. This system works great for dozens of levels, even well beyond level 29. But by level 138, the game suffers from an integer overflow bug and believes you're on a negative level. So, it pulls a color palette from an incorrect place, and the result is these bizarre-looking colors. Starting from level 138 and looping every 54 levels here on out, each level has a glitched color palette. Some are stranger looking than others, but for the most part it doesn't impact the gameplay. It's just an aesthetic glitch, much like the bug level counter. Except, some color palettes are so dark that you can barely see them on a normal TV. The first one of these is on level 146, a mixture of dark blue, dark green, and black. Programmer Greg Cannon went through all the glitched colors and assigned nicknames to them. Level 146 got the nickname Dusk. And sure enough, Dusk was the level that took Eric out. He couldn't see the pieces anymore. He probably could have gone a lot longer had it not been for this level. But it marked the end of his 6.4 million point game. If someone wanted to beat Eric's score, they'd most likely not only need to make it back to the glitched colors, but also find a way to make it past Dusk. And right now, nobody was close to doing either of those things. In all honesty, the rest of the community was just trying to play catch-up with Eric. But as the months passed in 2022, players tried to close the enormous gap in scores. In September 2022, Alex Thatch became the second player to break 4 million points. And a few months later, Dog playing Tetris passed 5 million points. Yet both players remained well short of Eric's score, and neither of them reached the glitched colors. After these scores, there was nearly no activity at the top level for close to a year. New players managed to reach 3 and 4 million points, but the very top remained unchanged. Eric's 6.4 million score towered above the rest. Too daunting to try an even approach. The community needed some form of motivation. And right around then, in November 2023, they got that motivation in the form of a tournament. No Cap November. See, tournament games used to be no more than 10 minutes each. You'd rack up as many points as you could, then hit the kill screen on level 29 and top out. But then rolling came along, allowing players to last much longer on the kill screen. And tournament games turned into marathons of endurance, rather than going for points. So, organizers began forcing players to stop at level 39, restoring the original purpose of the kill screen. But just for fun, in November 2023, the community decided to do one tournament under the old rules. Players would be allowed to play indefinitely at the level 29 speed, with no cap at level 39. So, to prepare for the tournament, players began practicing level 29 more than ever before. They tried to build up stamina to outlast everyone else. And it turns out, this practice is exactly what the community needed. Because in the build-up to the no-cap tournament, for the first time in over a year, new players reached the glitched colors. A player named Gerald Freeman reportedly got a score of 6.321 million points. In true Tetris fashion, it was unreported, but also short of the world record. Instead, the score we're going to look at is one performed by Pixel Andy on November 17th, 2023. Andy had been a top-tier player for years now, constantly in the top 10, but never holding the record. But during tournament practice, he had gotten even better, and now he was able to take a run at the top spot. Andy hit the kill screen, and then began clearing level after level. 40, then 60, then 80, and then 100. Pixel Andy was starting to approach the glitched colors. The world record was getting closer, but he'd likely still have to beat Dusk. Passing level 120, Andy was still rolling. But then, just 8 levels away from glitched colors, he misdropped. Thankfully, his stack was still low, and it was a quick recovery. But it was a sudden reminder of how quickly things can get out of hand. On level 138, Andy entered the glitched colors. 8 levels to go before reaching Dusk. He played through the bizarre-looking colors, and was moments away from level 146. It was time for Dusk. And yet, when he got there, I don't think he was ready for it.
E009, what is this? Wait. I actually can't see. Wait, I genuinely can't see. What are these? Who made these colors, bro? Why would you choose that? There we go.
He did it, and was immediately treated with a much brighter level 147. This was it. Pixel Andy was locked in. He'd survived Dusk's color palette, and now there was no telling how long he could play for. Until he made it to the very next level.
What is going on? Look at the colors. I can't see it. No, I couldn't see it. I couldn't see it on my screen. It just went dark.
Yeah, Dusk isn't the only hard color palette. Just 2 levels later, on level 148, you encounter Charcoal. It features a mix of white, dark gray, and black. And it's even harder than Dusk. After playing 147 levels beautifully, Andy was not ready for Charcoal. He'd made it over 6.4 million points. He topped out just 57,000 shy of Eric's world record. A heartbreaking finish. Now, this was a new record for the highest level reached, 2 levels higher than Eric. But the glitched colors were a problem. Dusk and Charcoal had taken out both players who'd made it this far. But to significantly raise the score record, you'd need to make it past both these levels. The community was at an impasse. Someone had to find a solution. Maybe that someone could be Fractal. Fractal broke onto the scene in 2019, achieving his first max out. And since then, all he'd done was improve. He'd taken his score to 5.7 million points. And that November, he won the